Chapter 31. Sentiron Games. After a few minutes of silent walking, they came upon the hangar and walked inside. The familiar coldness of the concrete they were walking on made Saberclaw feel at home. She saw Silver Spot immediately go to the corner with the G for a refill and heard the clanking of Razorwing's steps fade away, suggesting he left to do something on his own. However, she continued hearing footsteps heavier than her own trailing behind her. By now, Saberclaw could tell the difference between Lockjaw's and Razorwing's steps. Lockjaw's footsteps were more coordinated, but Razorwing's were heavier and slightly louder, as if the red robot was announcing his arrival. Thus, Saberclaw knew that Lockjaw was following her without turning to look. She didn't mind this, so she didn't say anything. Saberclaw turned and called to Silver Spot like someone she had seen too often. "Hey, Silver, are the humans back yet?" she asked. Silver Spot looked up, not fully turning her head to face Saberclaw, and answered, "Yes, they should be. I'm not sure where they are, but they might be inside the house." Silver Spot immediately turned back to whatever she was doing. Saberclaw shrugged and turned to face Lockjaw. He looked like he wanted to start a conversation, but Saberclaw held up her finger as if asking for a second to do something. Lockjaw sighed and waited as she walked out of the hangar. The hangar was basically the base of operations, but the humans didn't actually live in it. There were no beds or anything in the hangar that the humans required for daily life, but they luckily had a house built right beside the hangar. Sam Carley had originally intended to be with his creations almost all the time, so he built the hangar beside his own house. Sam's wife, Catherine Carley, was not entirely on board with this idea due to a growing family and growing danger that would threaten this family. However, Sam must have convinced her because that was the layout to this day. Catherine has been on a work trip for a few months now, and this was secretly planned by Sam because of the danger of being so close to the Sentiron base. He wanted to do the same with Lila, but thought better of it because of the fact that she would probably be safer under the direct protection of the robots due to her extreme involvement. Now, Sam, John, and Lila lived in the house built into the hangar. There was a balcony on the wall of the main room in the hangar with a door built into the wall. This door led into the house's attic and eventually led into the house. Saberclaw did have the ability to enter the house this way, since she could turn into a human, but she had been told multiple times by Lila that it was creepy to randomly find her somewhere in the house, so Saberclaw decided to do it another way. Usually, Saberclaw would knock on the front door, but she had a hunch that Lila was in her room. Lila's room had a large window, and Saberclaw felt it would be more appropriate for the occasion if she very gently knocked on the window. This was a surprisingly hard quest, however. Getting to the window was easy enough. Saberclaw just walked around the house. The window was its own challenge. If Saberclaw knocked too hard, she could break it way too easily. If she didn't knock hard enough, it wouldn't get Lila's attention. Saberclaw went up to the window and cautiously brought her large, metal hand up to the window. She whispered to herself, "Ugh, I hate glass." Saberclaw's circular joints moved as she extended her finger and pecked lightly on the window. Saberclaw looked in and saw Lila jump. In Lila's perspective, she was simply relaxing from a long day and playing on her phone on her bed when she saw a familiar green glow flow in from her window. She didn't realize this before a loud, sharp banging sound rang from the glass pane. Lila jumped out of bed and dropped her phone, looking out the window and seeing Saberclaw's silhouette against the darkening sky and the glow of her metal optics. Lila put her hand over her chest and smiled, running out of her room with excitement. Saberclaw smiled too and clapped her hands with success as she whispered to herself, "Ha! I have once again conquered the window." She stood up and began walking around the house. Lila slammed the front door behind her without realizing and rushed down the short flight of stairs onto the driveway in the dark of night. The sun had completely gone down now, and it was maybe 9 o'clock at night. She quickly turned back towards the house and saw Saberclaw's large outline looming over the house as she walked around it. The eerie glow of her green eyes against the pitch-black sky and her slowly walking, dark body looked like something out of a horror movie, but Lila didn't feel afraid at all. Lila could see the smile on Saberclaw's face as she came closer and entered the light from a nearby streetlight. Lila spoke loudly up to Saberclaw as she walked closer. "Well, you didn't have to be so rough with the window. I thought someone was trying to break in," she exclaimed as Saberclaw kneeled down. Saberclaw laughed and answered with sarcastic annoyance. "Hey, you won't realize how annoying glass is until you have the strength to break it if you tap it too hard. I have to get just the right amount of pressure or I break the glass," she exclaimed as Lila laughed. Saberclaw was right about one thing. Lila would never understand something like having too much strength to knock on a window correctly. Saberclaw asked, "Well, how did it go with the military?" She balled her fist and stretched it out to Lila. Lila balled her fist and punched Saberclaw's fingers. "Yeah, I managed to get Raphael's number, to give you the short answer. He said he will call us tomorrow afternoon to see if he got the military to help us. He said it could go really badly because he might even have to take it up with the president, and that's crazy if you ask me." She shook her head and looked up at Saberclaw. The robot sat down and asked, "The president is like the head of the whole country, right?" She looked at Lila, and the girl nodded. Saberclaw's eyes widened for a second, then went back to normal. Is that okay? Because I don't really feel comfortable with so many people knowing about my existence if I am supposed to be a secret. I don't feel like getting hunted or harassed." She tilted her head, and Lila gestured as she spoke. Lila explained, "Okay, so Dad asked him about that too. Raphael assured us and said that everyone who knows is sworn to complete secrecy." She shrugged as Saberclaw shook her head with doubt. Saberclaw looked up at the starry, dark sky. "Good to know. Anyway, isn't it your bedtime?" she asked, knowing this would annoy Lila. Sure enough, Lila chuckled and exclaimed, "Saber, I'm almost 15. I don't have a bedtime anymore. Although you are right, it's getting late anyway." She sighed and walked inside again. Saberclaw waved and called with a sweet voice, "Good night, Lila." She knew that Lila wouldn't appreciate this, and Lila, being as predictable as usual, said nothing and waved back as she closed the door behind her. Saberclaw smiled and laughed to herself as she began walking back to the hangar. The night was beautiful, yet held unknown secrets to the naked eye. However, Saberclaw's eyesight was more powerful than a human's eyesight, so she could see almost as well as in the daylight. Saberclaw looked around and saw a possum scurrying around the yard before quickly ducking into the ditch. An owl hooted in the distance, causing the large robot to turn in its direction and observe it. The owl looked majestic with its long feathers on the top of its head and its large wings tucked onto its sides. It spread these wings and flapped them, launching itself from the branch and silently gliding through the darkness. Stars were nothing special in this area. There were a few balls of light here and there against the black canvas of sky, but nothing like the images that Saberclaw had seen in movies or images she searched for on her database. The moon, however, was very much something to be admired. Most people discredit the moon because they are usually asleep when it rises, but Saberclaw didn't sleep, so she had opportunities to see its full beauty. Saberclaw looked around the sky for the moon, eventually spotting the large, glowing rock. The craters on the surface of the moon made it unique and unmistakable as Saberclaw's gaze fell upon it. She sighed as she watched the silver colors cast from it flow over the forest and herself along with everything around her. The moon was like the sun, just less harmful to the eyes and less bright. Although the moon was not to be considered less than the sun. The sun was beautiful too, but the moon simply had a dark aura that was only boosted by its silver radiation, giving it beauty beyond compare. Saberclaw turned away from the moon and entered the hangar. Surprisingly, Lockjaw was not waiting for her like she had asked. She looked around and saw everything in its normal position, except her teammates were nowhere to be found. She peered out the garage door at the large field, expecting to see the others doing something. However, there was nothing but silence stretching over the grass, and Saberclaw was left to ponder about where the other robots were. The only things that the Sentiron really did at night was patrol, train, and do nonsense on the field. Saberclaw checked one of those off of her mental list and began to walk down the hallway to check out the training room. It was brightly lit with white lights built into the ceiling in gray, Metal walls formed a stretched, long box of a hallway. She headed towards the training room and past the medical room. She glanced inside like she did when she passed all the other rooms and continued forward. Then, she realized and abruptly stopped, almost falling over. She shuffled backwards and poked her head around the doorframe. She peered in and saw Lockjaw sitting upright on the medical bed and Silver Spot bent over, repairing him. Razorwing, who was standing beside Silver Spot, looked up and saw Saberclaw's slightly worried face. "Hey, Saber. Don't worry, he's fine." He sounded slightly annoyed, but Saberclaw ignored this and walked in. Silver Spot leaned over to be able to see around Lockjaw and made eye contact with Saberclaw. "Yes, I'm just finishing some final repairs. In fact, I still haven't done a checkup on you yet today. Come here." She waved Saberclaw over, and the green robot made her way to the medical table. Lockjaw turned his head and watched Saberclaw as she stopped near him. He smiled at her, and she returned the gesture. Saberclaw asked, "Yeah, about that." "Well, Lockjaw, and I'd be clear to go back to school tomorrow." She watched as Silver Spot looked away from Lockjaw's scarred leg. Silver Spot shrugged. "Well, it depends if you are completely repaired or not. Lockjaw's fine." She put her tools away and gestured for Lockjaw to get up. Lockjaw obeyed and stood, his metal joints and pistons squeaking as his weight was put back onto his feet. Saberclaw moved forward to take his place as Lockjaw walked away. As he passed her, he looked down at her and smiled, but she took offense to this gesture and translated it as trying to make her look small. She stuck out her metal elbow and hit his side forcefully, causing him to gasp and clutch his side dramatically as he dodged out of her way. This caused her to laugh and roll her eyes as she sat on the medical bed, placing her armored boots on the floor. Silver Spot began to look over Saberclaw's body, especially checking the weak and recently injured areas. Saberclaw was clearly going to have the large scar stretching down the middle of her chest for the rest of her life, but it didn't look like it had been reopened. She also looked at Saberclaw's wings and the backs of her knee joints. Every wire was sturdily secured in place, and the G-flow was normal. After a few silent minutes of looking over Saberclaw, Silver Spot began putting her examination tools back in their designated places. Silver Spot looked at Saberclaw and stood back up. "All right, you're free to go." She walked towards the machines on the wall to make sure they were working correctly. Saberclaw popped up and clapped once with victory. "Oh yeah, now I get to mess with Rosalind again. Besides, I would be suspicious if I was a principal and one of my students very rarely attended." She laughed and walked over to talk to Lockjaw, but was intercepted by Razorwing. He blocked her path so closely that she had to take a step back to not collide with him. "Well, the principal is going to have to suck it up because you can't fight an alien race and keep a perfect attendance." He looked at her face with determination, waiting for her response. Saberclaw clutched the chain around her neck and fidgeted with it as she coped with her nervousness. "Yeah, I guess so. School might actually be a problem, because what are we going to do once we graduate? I know that is years from now, but will they expect us to go to college or something?" she asked as she stood still. Razorwing shrugged, and both of them looked up at Silver Spot when they saw her walking toward them. Her footsteps echoed as she said, "I'm sure it is normal in the human society for some students to finish school and do nothing with their lives. However, I'm also sure that it is severely looked down upon, but it doesn't really matter to us." She rubbed her hands together as she approached the two robots. Lockjaw seemed to suddenly appear beside Saberclaw and ask, "Well, I don't think I have been here for a night before. I assume you don't sleep because I don't. So what do you all do to pass the time?" he asked as he protectively stood close beside Saberclaw, his gaze immediately making Razorwing uncomfortable. Razorwing took a small step back, and Saberclaw noticed. She looked up and saw Lockjaw, jumping a little when she saw how close he was. Her annoyed and slightly frightened eyes warned him that his nearness wasn't necessary, but he silently squinted. His expression argued that it was necessary. Silver Spot's laugh interrupted their silent conversation. "Huh, that's right. It's your first night on the Sentiron team, so we have got to show you our nighttime hobbies. Let's go out to the field." She walked between Lockjaw and Saberclaw, making them move out of her way with confusion. Silver Spot slyly smirked to herself as she exited the room, expecting everyone to follow her. Lockjaw and Saberclaw looked at one another, both a little surprised. They shrugged and jogged out to catch up with Silver Spot as they were followed by Razorwing. The three of them went out the garage door on the backside of the hangar to see Silver Spot in the middle of the field with a Sentiron-sized metal ball. She tossed the ball in the air and caught it with one hand, smirking as she eyed Lockjaw. The blue robot instantly got a bad feeling and tried to back out. I could just go on patrol dash, he began, but was interrupted. Saberclaw laughed, grabbed his wrist, and said, "Oh, come on, Lockjaw. It's your first official night as a Sentiron, so you've got to act like one." She ran forward, dragging Lockjaw behind her. Razorwing laughed and jogged after them, still laughing, with his arms close to his sides. The three of them stood before Silver Spot as she tossed the ball up and down. She raised her chin and explained, "All right, this is the game we play most nights. It's called Monkey in the Middle. Usually, it's a pretty innocent human child's game, but we Sentiron add a not-so-innocent twist. We are large and metal, of course, but flight is also allowed. And, Saber," she pointed an accusing, metal finger at Saberclaw. "No telekinesis this time." Saberclaw chuckled, but had been hoping that Silver Spot would forget about last time because she had intended to use her telekinesis again. Lockjaw's eyes widened a little. Wait, did you say flight is allowed?" "I've heard of that game, but wouldn't it get a little hectic if flight is allowed?" he asked with suspicion. Razorwing crossed his arms and laughed at Lockjaw. "Yep, that's the point. And I'm going to win this time." He looked directly at Saberclaw, and she glared at him back with the ends of her lips curved upward as she suppressed a smile. Silver Spot, realizing another rule that should be made, Razor, no invisibility either. She tilted her head toward Razorwing as he threw his hands up in frustration. He, too, had intended to use his special ability. These new rules made it fair for all players, but Lockjaw was the biggest, so he believed he was most likely to win the most. Silver Spot didn't warn anyone and chucked the metal ball at Saberclaw. Saberclaw's instincts kicked in, and her reaction time made her catch it, although she was caught off guard. Silver Spot ran backwards, putting distance between her and Saberclaw. Silver Spot smiled and put her hands on her knees. "All right, Razorwing, you are on a team with me and Saberclaw for now. Play," she shouted to Razorwing, and he instinctively put his hands up, calling for the ball. Razorwing called to Saberclaw, and the green robot tossed it to him. Lockjaw stood, confused, until Razorwing loudly commented, "Oh, the rookie is in the middle first." He looked to Silver Spot, who had her hands up, ready to catch the ball. Razorwing mimicked a basketball shot and threw the ball to Silver Spot. The medic had her hands in the air, feet away from catching the ball. However, a blue body entered her line of sight. Lockjaw jumped and flapped his wings a little, knocking Silver Spot out of his way as he plucked the ball from the air. Silver Spot hit the ground and rolled once, but she quickly recovered, stood, and dusted herself off while smirking at Lockjaw. The blue robot turned and smiled proudly. Silver Spot said, "Well, if that's how we're going to play this game, then two can play like that." She stood tall, waiting for someone to make a move. Lockjaw turned to look at Razorwing. So who's in the middle now? You or Silver?" he asked. Before Razorwing could answer, Lockjaw felt the ball being yanked out from under his arm. Lockjaw whipped around and saw Silver Spot slyly holding the ball. "I was, and now you are again. That's your lesson for today, Lockjaw. Always expect the unexpected." She forcefully threw the ball to Saberclaw, away from Lockjaw entirely. Saberclaw caught the ball, but the force was extremely intense. The ball spun in her hands and slowed down quickly, but she had to press it against her torso in order to completely stop it. She looked at Silver Spot with a stunned expression. "Where was this strength in battle, Silver? You just about took me out." She laughed as Lockjaw ran towards her. He was instantly in front of her with his wings spread out, keeping her from throwing the ball, as his arms reached for the metal sphere. Saberclaw continued laughing as she taunted Lockjaw, moving her hands and the ball out of the way seconds before he could grab it. He laughed too as Saberclaw spread her wings. She launched upward, her wings carrying her high into the air. Lockjaw looked up. He hadn't expected her to fly. She threw the ball to Razor Wing from above Lockjaw. The four continued this game for the rest of the night. Don't forget to tell me how I did in the comments.